Nina stared out of her bedroom window, watching the quiet streets of her small town. It was a life she had grown used to, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her mother, Clara, had always been ambitious, constantly chasing after the glamorous life she felt they deserved. Ever since Clara had remarried, Nina had felt the shift in the air, a subtle but persistent pressure, as though her mother was on the verge of asking her for something monumental. One evening, as they sat together at dinner, Clara finally broached the subject that had been on her mind for weeks. "Nina, darling, you know how hard things have been since your father left us. But there's an opportunity now, with David. He's wealthy, kind, and he seems quite taken with you. If you got close to him, it could mean a better life for us, financially stable, secure." Nina's fork paused mid-air, her heart racing. "Are you suggesting I pursue a relationship with him?" she asked, incredulous. Clara smiled, her tone soft but firm. "It wouldn't hurt to try, dear. Think about what it could mean for us." That night, Nina lay awake, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Clara had never been shy about using her charm to get ahead, but this felt different, more calculated, more personal. The idea of pursuing a relationship with David, a man nearly twice her age, left her feeling unsettled. She had only met him a handful of times, and while he seemed kind enough, the notion of getting close to him at her mother's urging felt wrong. But Nina also couldn't deny the truth in Clara's words. They had struggled financially for years, barely scraping by. David was wealthy, influential, and generous, yet something about the idea didn't sit well with her. Was she really willing to compromise her values for the sake of her family's comfort? The question gnawed at her as she fell into a restless sleep. The following week, Clara arranged for Nina and David to spend time together. It was a casual lunch, or so her mother called it, but Nina could feel the weight of Clara's expectations on her shoulders as they sat at a cafe in town. David was pleasant, polite, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. He asked about her studies, her interests, and her aspirations, and for a moment, Nina felt at ease. But as the conversation progressed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Was David aware of Clara's motives? Did he see her as a pawn in some greater scheme? The thought made Nina uncomfortable, and she struggled to remain composed throughout the lunch. When David mentioned his recent divorce, Nina sensed a vulnerability in him, one that made her question her mother's plan even more. As the weeks passed, Nina found herself spending more time with David, but each encounter left her feeling more conflicted. On the one hand, David was kind, attentive, and generous. He treated her with respect, and she began to enjoy their conversations, finding in him a sense of companionship that surprised her. But on the other hand, Clara's persistent pressure loomed over every interaction, reminding her of the ulterior motives behind their budding friendship. Nina's internal conflict deepened as she began to develop a genuine fondness for David. She appreciated his company, but every time she thought about her mother's expectations, a knot formed in her stomach. Was this the life she wanted for herself? Was she willing to sacrifice her independence and integrity for the sake of her family's financial stability? One evening, after another dinner with David, Clara confronted Nina. "You're doing well, darling, but you need to push things further," she said, her tone sharp. "David likes you. He could fall in love with you if you play your cards right. This is our chance to secure a better future." Nina recoiled at her mother's words, feeling the pressure mount. "I don't want to manipulate him, Mom," she protested. Clara's eyes hardened. "It's not manipulation, it's strategy. You have to think about the bigger picture. Our future depends on this." Nina felt a surge of anger and frustration. She didn't want to be a pawn in her mother's schemes, but Clara's words held a painful truth. They were struggling, and David could offer them a way out. Still, the idea of sacrificing her autonomy for material gain left her feeling hollow. Despite the pressure from her mother, Nina continued to spend time with David, trying to separate her own feelings from Clara's ambitions. Over time, she found that she genuinely enjoyed his company. He was thoughtful, funny, and easy to talk to. They shared stories about their lives, and Nina found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't expected. David, too, seemed to appreciate their growing friendship. He was still reeling from his recent divorce, and Nina sensed that he was looking for companionship, not romance. This realization brought her a strange sense of relief, even as it deepened her internal conflict. How could she continue this friendship knowing her mother's expectations? One afternoon, as they sat in a quiet park, David opened up to Nina about his failed marriage. "I never stopped loving her," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "But she moved on, and I've been trying to fill the void ever since. I guess that's why I've been spending so much time with you. It's comforting, in a way." Nina felt a jolt of realization. David wasn't looking for a romantic relationship with her. He was still deeply in love with his ex-wife. The weight of her mother's plan suddenly seemed unbearable. How could she continue to pursue this friendship under false pretenses, knowing that David's heart still belonged to someone else? That night, Nina confronted her mother. "Mom, this isn't right," she said, her voice trembling. "David isn't interested in me like that. He's still in love with his ex-wife, and even if he wasn't, I don't want to be part of your plan. I want to live my own life, make my own choices." Clara's face hardened, but Nina could see a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "You don't understand, Nina," she said, her voice strained. "I'm doing this for us. For you. We can't keep living like this." Nina shook her head. "I'd rather struggle than compromise my values. I'm not going to manipulate someone for money, Mom. That's not who I am." The confrontation left Clara and Nina at odds. For days, they barely spoke, the tension in the house palpable. Nina felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that she had finally stood up to her mother, but guilt that she had hurt Clara in the process. She knew her mother meant well, in her own twisted way. But Nina couldn't continue living under the weight of Clara's expectations. David, unaware of the full extent of Clara's plan, continued to reach out to Nina. They met for coffee occasionally, their friendship intact. But the dynamic between them had shifted. Nina no longer felt the pressure to fulfill her mother's wishes, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of freedom. As the days passed, Clara began to reflect on her actions. She had always been driven by a desire to provide for her family, to give Nina the life she felt she deserved. But in her pursuit of security and status, she had lost sight of what really mattered, her daughter's happiness. Clara watched Nina from a distance, seeing the newfound confidence in her. It was a painful realization, but one that she couldn't ignore. She had pushed too hard, and in doing so, she had almost lost the one person who mattered most to her. One evening, Clara approached Nina, her demeanor softer than it had been in weeks. "Nina, I've been thinking about what you said," she began hesitantly. "I was wrong to push you like that. I wanted to give you a better life, but I see now that I went about it the wrong way." Nina looked at her mother, surprised by the admission. Clara had always been stubborn, unwilling to admit when she was wrong. "Mom, I know you meant well," Nina said gently, "but I need to make my own choices. I can't live my life for someone else's expectations." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand. I just want you to be happy, Nina." With their relationship on the mend, Nina and Clara began to rebuild their lives, this time with a new understanding of each other's boundaries. Nina was determined to forge her own path, free from the weight of her mother's ambitions. She returned to her studies with a renewed sense of purpose, focusing on her own goals and dreams. David remained a part of Nina's life, but their relationship was now built on mutual respect and friendship, not the manipulative plan Clara had once envisioned. Nina valued his company, but she was no longer weighed down by the pressure to pursue something more. As the months passed, Nina and David's friendship deepened. They often met for coffee or took walks together, their conversations easy and comfortable. David seemed to appreciate Nina's honesty and independence, and Nina was grateful for his support during such a tumultuous time in her life. Though there were moments when Nina wondered what might have happened if things had been different, she was content with the way their relationship had evolved. David had become an important part of her life, but not in the way her mother had intended. Clara, too, underwent a transformation. For the first time in years, she began to focus on herself, rather than on trying to secure a better life through others. She reconnected with old friends, pursued hobbies she had long abandoned, and slowly began to build a life that was fulfilling on her own terms. Her relationship with Nina improved as well. They no longer tiptoed around each other, and Clara had learned to respect Nina's independence. Though their bond had been tested, it had ultimately grown stronger. One day, David confided in Nina that his ex-wife, Sophia, had reached out to him. "She wants to meet," he said, his voice tinged with both hope and uncertainty. "I don't know what to expect." Nina encouraged him to go, knowing how much Sophia had meant to him. "You should talk to her," she said gently. "You deserve closure, whatever that looks like." David nodded, but Nina could see the conflict in his eyes. He had spent so long grieving the loss of his marriage, and now the possibility of reconciliation had been thrust back into his life. David's meeting with Sophia was emotional, but ultimately cathartic. They talked for hours, revisiting the highs and lows of their relationship. Though there was love between them, they both realized that their paths had diverged too far to come back together. David returned to Nina the next day, his mood somber but resolved. "We had our time," he said quietly, "but it's over now. I think I'm finally ready to move on. Nina smiled, glad that David had found the closure he needed. Their friendship, once complicated by unspoken expectations, now felt lighter, freer. With the drama of the past behind them, both Nina and David began to explore new horizons. Nina focused on her education, determined to build a future for herself on her own terms. David, too, started to look forward, no longer haunted by the ghosts of his past. Their friendship remained a constant in each other's lives, a source of support and understanding. Though they had both been through difficult times, they had emerged stronger, more self-assured. One evening, Clara sat Nina down and apologized once again for her past behavior. I know I've said this before, but I really am sorry, Nina, she said softly. I pushed you too hard, and I can see now that I was wrong. Nina took her mother's hand, appreciating the sincerity in her voice. I forgive you, Mom, she said, but we need to keep moving forward, together. It was a moment of healing for both women, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had learned from their mistakes. As time passed, Nina continued to grow into her own person, free from the weight of her mother's expectations. She pursued her passions, made new friends, and embraced the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. Clara, too, found a sense of peace in her new life, no longer consumed by the pursuit of status and wealth. Their relationship, once fraught with tension and manipulation, had evolved into something more honest and respectful. They had both learned the importance of setting boundaries and respecting each other's choices. In the end, Nina and Clara emerged from their ordeal stronger than ever. They had faced their flaws, their fears, and their failures, and had come out the other side with a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. Nina had forged her own path, free from her mother's influence, and Clara had learned the value of self-respect and independence. As they sat together one evening, watching the sunset, Nina felt a sense of peace. She had chosen her own future, one that wasn't dictated by societal expectations or her mother's ambitions. And for the first time in a long while, both she and Clara felt a sense of hope for what lay ahead.